a 15-year-old girl vanished on her way home. Her mother spent the rest of her life waiting for answers or justice, and died without them. On March 18, 1978, at 3:15 p.m., Debra Rizzo walked home from school in Clearwater, Florida. 7 minutes later, her Walkman was smashed in the dirt, her body 200 yards from her front door. 46 years later, her silver pendant is still missing. Her killer's DNA is still waiting. And this street, it's still holding its breath. But here's what he didn't count on you. Because someone's watching this right now who knows exactly how those 7 minutes went. And it's time to talk. The hum of cicadas, the creak of a swing set down the block, the faint clink of a bike chain as it rolls over pavement. It's 3:15 p.m. on March 18th, 1978, and Clearwater, Florida, is the picture of suburban peace. Sunlight spills over rooftops, glinting off wind chimes and freshly waxed station wagons. Somewhere, a screen door slams, a dog barks, normalcy hangs in the air, thick as the humidity. By 3:22 p.m., the laughter fades. A scream, brief, sharp, cuts through the afternoon. A neighbor glances out their kitchen window. Just a cat, they think. But it wasn't a cat. It was Debra Rizzo, 15 years old. New jeans, a striped shirt, a silver pendant around her neck, still warm from her skin. 7 minutes. That's how long it took to walk from the corner of Drew Street to her front door. 7 minutes between goodbye and goodbye. They'd find her body at dusk. Just 200 yards from home, her Walkman cracked open. Stevie Nicks' voice, frozen mid-lyric, lay in the dirt beside her. The palm trees kept swaying. The cicadas kept screaming. 46 years later, those 7 minutes are still unaccounted for. The pendant, never found. And the person who did this? They're out there, still breathing, still hiding. This isn't just a true crime story. This is about a girl who never got to finish her math homework. A mother who kept her daughter's bed made for years, just in case. A killer who's spent decades thinking they got away with it. But here's what they didn't count on. Time runs out. Secrets rot. And somewhere, right now, someone's about to hit play on this video and finally speak up. Victim: cold case, unsolved homicide. These are the words that define Debra Rizzo now. But let's strip those labels away. Let's meet the girl behind the headlines. Debra Lynn Rizzo, born October 12th, 1962, a Libra, her horoscope that week promised a surprise from someone unexpected. She hated her freckles, but refused to cover them with makeup. She burned every batch of cookies she ever tried to bake. And that Fleetwood Mac obsession? She'd play Rhiannon on repeat, scribbling the lyrics in the margins of her biology notes. Take your silver chain. She'd doodle, underlining it twice, a line that'd later feel like a cruel joke when her own silver pendant vanished. Her best friend Linda Garcia still keeps the mixtape Debra made her 2 weeks before she died. Side A, disco hits for dancing. Side B, sad songs for when boys are stupid. They'd spend Friday nights in Linda's basement, painting each other's nails frosted coral and trying to summon ghosts with a Ouija board. Debra swore it moved once, Linda says, but she also swore broccoli was a government conspiracy to make kids miserable. Then there was the mirror. That's where her mom would catch her, practicing smiles for Greg Thompson, the senior who worked at the record store. Not a crush, Debra insisted. I just like how he says vinyl instead of records. But her diary told a different story. Page 23. If Greg asks me to homecoming, I'll wear the blue dress and perfume. Mom says I'm too young. Ugh, this is the Debra who mattered. The one who wrote maybe in bubbly letters when yearbook editors asked if she'd be famous someday. The one who stole her dad's screwdriver to fix her brother's bike chain the night before she died. The girl who was, not the tragedy that is, yet in police archives. She's case hashtag 78-0456. A autopsy photo. A evidence log listing one white sneaker. Size 6. Bloodstained. Even now, people reduce her to how she left this world, not how she lived in it. But here's the truth. When you turn a person into a statistic, you let her killer erase her twice. Once with violence, again with silence. Debra's name doesn't belong in a file cabinet. It belongs on a diploma, a marriage certificate, a lifetime of unmade memories. So say her name, remember her freckles, her terrible cookies, her laugh that made soda shoot out of Linda's nose. Because the moment we see her as Debra, not just a victim, is the moment her story stops being cold and starts being personal. Let's walk this road together, minute by minute, second by second, because in the space between ordinary and unthinkable, there's a story waiting to break. 3:14 p.m. The school bell rings. Debra shoves her history textbook into a canvas bag. The Florida heat sticks to her skin as she steps outside. At the corner of Drew Street and Engman, she waves to her friend Linda. "See you tomorrow," she calls out. Linda will later tell police it was the last time she saw Debra alive. 3:15 p.m. Debra starts walking. 7 minutes from home. Her Walkman plays Fleetwood Mac's Dreams. She'd borrowed the cassette from Greg at the record store. "You're gonna owe me a Coke if you scratch it," he joked. She's wearing jeans, a red and white striped shirt, and the silver pendant her mom gave her last Christmas. Engraved on the back, "To DLR, love you to the moon." 3:17 p.m. She passes Mrs. Henderson's house. The old widow is watering geraniums on her porch. "Afternoon." "Debbie," she chirps. Debra cringes. She'd hated being called Debbie since turning 15. But she smiles anyway. "Hi, Mrs. H." 3:19 p.m. A blue pickup truck rolls down Drew Street. The driver? Still unknown. Debra glances at her reflection in a parked car's window, adjusts her pendant. 3:21 p.m. She's halfway home. The palm trees here are thinner, the houses spaced farther apart. A dog barks behind a chain-link fence. 3:22 p.m. A scream. Sharp. Sudden. Like metal scraping bone. Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, 42, pauses while washing dishes. "Just a cat," she tells herself, but her hands won't stop shaking. She doesn't call the police, doesn't look outside, just dries her hands on a checkered towel and turns up the TV. 3:25 p.m. Debra's little brother, Tommy, sits at the kitchen table. His math homework, fractions, is spread out in front of him. "Deb's gonna help me," he tells their mom. She promised. 3:30 p.m. Tommy chews his pencil eraser, checks the clock, listens for the click of the front door. Down the hall. Their mom folds laundry. A sock slips from the basket, Debra's favorite, with a tiny hole near the toe. 3:37 p.m. 7 minutes have passed. Debra should have been home at 3:22. Tommy walks to the window. The street is quiet. Too quiet. 3:45 p.m. Mrs. Rizzo calls Linda's house. "Is Debra still there?" Linda's mom answers. "She left half an hour ago." 3:52 p.m. Tommy's fractions blur on the page. His sister's chair sits empty. 4 p.m. The Rizzo phone rings. It's Debra's dad, calling from work. "Put Deb on. I gotta ask her about." She's not here. Mrs. Rizzo interrupts. Her voice cracks. 4:07 p.m. Mr. Rizzo's pickup peels onto Drew Street. He drives the route slowly, then faster, then too fast. Rolls down the window. "Debra," he shouts. Neighbors peer through blinds. 4:26 p.m. The sun dips lower. Shadows stretch across the road like claws. 4:48 p.m. A patrol car arrives. 2 officers knock on doors. Missing teen. Last seen in jeans. Striped shirt. Mrs. Pritchard hesitates. I thought I heard something earlier, but it was probably nothing. 5:12 p.m. They find her Walkman first. Smashed. Dreams still spinning inside. Warped by the heat. 5:30 p.m. Debra's body lies curled beneath a palmetto bush. Her striped shirt is torn. The silver pendant? Gone. Her right hand clutches a handful of sand spurs, as if she'd grabbed at the ground, fighting to stay alive. 5:45 p.m. Detectives string yellow tape across Drew Street. Neighbors whisper on porches. Tommy stares at his sister's empty chair. And somewhere blocks away, a killer washes their hands. 6:02 p.m. The first news van arrives. 200 yards. That's how close Debra Rizzo was to her front door when they found her. 200 yards, the length of 2 football fields. A distance she'd sprinted 100 times racing her brother Tommy. But on March 18th, 1978, it became a measurement of horror. Let's go there, to that patch of scrub pine behind the Andersons' house, where kids built forts out of plywood scraps, where fireflies lit up summer nights, where Debra's favorite oak tree stood, its roots tangled with soda cans and childhood secrets. It was 5:12 p.m. when Officer Rayburn spotted the Walkman, half buried in dirt, its cassette door hanging open like a broken jaw. Fleetwood Mac's Dreams still inside. The tape snapped in two. Stevie Nicks' voice, warped by the Florida heat, warbled "Thunder only happens when it's raining," a lyric that'd later haunt the detectives. 10 steps to the left. Beneath a palmetto bush crawling with sand spurs lay Debra. Her jeans were torn at the knees, her striped shirt ripped open, buttons scattered in the dirt like tiny teeth. The silver pendant her mother gave her? Gone. Vanished. As if the ground itself had swallowed it. But here's what the killer couldn't erase. Debra's right hand, clenched in a fist. Inside sand spurs. Dozens of them. Their spiky heads digging into her palm. She'd grabbed them as she fought. As she crawled. As she tried to stay alive. The medical examiner would later count 23 bruises. A fractured collarbone. Scratch marks running down her arms, not from the bush, but from her own fingernails. Because when they pried her left hand open, they found skin. His skin. DNA before DNA was a tool. Blood under her nails that wasn't hers. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a massacre. A 15-year-old girl, beaten so savagely that her own mother wouldn't recognize her face at the morgue. But let's pause here. Because in the chaos, there's a detail that changes everything. Debra's socks. One was white, ankle length, speckled with blood. The other, neon green. A mismatched pair she'd thrown on that morning while running late. Her mom had scolded her. Deb, people will think you're colorblind. But Debra just laughed. Maybe I am. That neon green sock still had the tag attached. 79 cents from Woolworths. Never removed. A mundane detail that shattered the Rizzos. Because it meant Debra died in something brand new. Something she never got to break in. By 6 p.m., Drew Street was swarming. Police lights painted the palm trees red and blue. Neighbors stood on porches, arms crossed, as if the tragedy might be contagious. Tommy Rizzo, age 11, sat on his bike at the edge of the tape, screaming, "Let me through," until an officer led him home. Forensics took photos, 167 of them, close-ups of the sand spurs in her hand, of the oak tree's bark, scraped raw where her body had been dragged, of a single footprint, size 10, tread pattern common to work boots, pressed into the mud 3 feet from her head. But here's what the cameras didn't capture. The smell. Coppery blood mixed with the sweet rot of palm berries. The sound of Mrs. Rizzo collapsing when detectives said, "We need someone to identify the body." The way Debra's father paced the street all night, flashlight in hand, muttering her pendant. "We have to find her pendant." And the killer? They left something behind too. Not just the skin under Debra's nails. Not just the boot print, but a pattern. Because this wasn't random. The location, 200 yards from safety. The timing, broad daylight. The brutality. This was someone who wanted her gone. Not just dead, but erased. Yet they failed. Debra's name is still here. Her story, still told. That neon green sock? Her brother Tommy keeps it in a Ziploc bag inside his dresser. Not as a relic of grief, but as evidence. A promise. Because here's the truth about 200 yards. It's not just a distance. It's a question. How did no one see? How did no one hear? And how has someone lived with this for 46 years? The answer is in the sand spurs, in the DNA, in the memories of anyone who ever walked Drew Street and thought, something's not right. This isn't a cold case. It's a ticking clock. And with every view of this video, the walls close in. Debra Rizzo's killer left evidence on her body. But they left something else. Too, a loose thread. And threads? They always unravel. Silence isn't empty. It's heavy. It's the weight of 100 interviews that went nowhere. Of polygraph tests that only deepened the fog. Of a town that swore it knew nothing, while whispering everything. Let's start with the numbers. 100 people. Neighbors. Teachers. The boy who bagged Debra's groceries at Publix. The crossing guard who waved to her that afternoon. Even the priest who'd baptized her as a baby. Detectives asked them all the same question. What did you see? Most said nothing. Some said too much. Take the Rizzo family. They were polygraphed first, standard procedure. They were told. Debra's father, Frank, a mechanic with grease permanently etched into his knuckles, answered every question. Did you harm your daughter? No, the needle didn't flinch. Her brother Tommy, 11 years old, drew pictures of the bad man he imagined during sessions. None matched reality. Then there was the drifter, a man in his 30s, spotted sleeping behind the 7-Eleven off Drew Street. Rumors said he'd followed kids home from school. When police tracked him to a bus station in Tampa, he had alibis. A cashier who swore he'd bought a soda at 3:30 p.m. A ticket stub for a 4:15 Greyhound to Jacksonville. They let him go, but whispers grew louder. Was it Greg Thompson? The 18-year-old record store clerk Debra liked. He'd given her a Fleetwood Mac tape the week before she died. Police found letters in his locker, innocent notes about music, but detectives circled one line: "You're way cooler than the girls at my school." Greg passed a polygraph. No charges. Was it Mr. Ellis? The middle-aged neighbor who'd accidentally walked in on Debra changing her swimsuit at a pool party the summer before. He moved to Arizona 6 months after the murder, died in 1998, took his secrets to the grave. Or was it someone nobody suspected? The mailman, the ice cream truck driver, the quiet man who mowed lawns every Tuesday. Here's what we know for sure. In 2011, a lab in Quantico ran Debra's evidence through a new DNA database. The skin under her nails, the blood that wasn't hers, it all pointed to one man. Male, likely between 18 and 35 in 1978. His genetic code is now stamped in a system that cross-references ancestry websites. Arrest records, distant cousins. But here's what we don't know. Why the Clearwater police still refuse to release the full case file. Why 14 pages of witness statements are redacted. Why a 46-year-old active investigation has no active leads. Let's talk about the rumors. At the diner off Main Street, old-timers still argue over coffee. Had to be someone she knew. One insists. Why else wouldn't she scream louder? Another swears it was a trucker passing through. They found a Schlitz beer can near her body. None of us drank that swill. Then there's the theory that chills the Rizzos most. What if it was a cop? In 1985, an anonymous letter arrived at the station. Typed, "No return address. You're looking in the wrong places." The envelope had a partial fingerprint, too smudged to trace. But here's the truth about silence. It's a wound. Debra's mother, Carol, wrote letters to the DA every year on March 18th. "Tell me you're still looking." She'd beg. In 2003, a rookie detective reopened the case, found a box of evidence covered in dust. Debra's striped shirt, still sealed in plastic. The sand spurs from her hand, now brittle as ash. He spent 6 months re-interviewing retirees, tracking down the original coroner, even visiting Greg Thompson, now a grandfather in Boca Raton. Nothing. But in 2011, when the DNA hit, Carol sat in a cold interrogation room, hands trembling. "Does this mean you'll find him?" she asked. The detective hesitated. "It means he's in the system, somewhere." Somewhere. That word haunts this case. The killer is somewhere. In a nursing home, a prison cell, a family photo smirking beside grandchildren. His DNA is a landmine buried in a database, waiting for someone, a nephew, a half-sibling, a daughter submitting a 23andMe kit to trigger a match. But DNA can't tell us why. Why Debra? Why that street? Why 3:22 p.m.? Maybe she recognized him. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she fought because she knew this was her only chance to leave a trail. Skin under nails, hair in fists, a code only science could crack decades later. Here's what else silence does. It corrodes. The lead detective from 78 drank himself to death by 1992. Mrs. Pritchard, the neighbor who ignored the scream, moved away in 85, left no forwarding address. Tommy Rizzo, now 57, still lives in Clearwater. He mows his lawn every Tuesday, stares at the scrub pines, wonders if the killer does the same. And the blue pickup truck spotted that day? No license plate number, no make or model confirmed, just blue, a color that could have faded, been repainted, or rusted into oblivion. But here's what survives, the file. 1. 200 pages. Photos of the boot print. Transcripts of Greg Thompson saying, "I barely knew her in 1978, and I think about her every day in 2003. A. Polaroid of Debra's locker. Left open the afternoon she died. Inside, a math book, a hairbrush, and a note that said, "Meet me after school," in unmarked handwriting. They never found out who wrote it. The silence is loudest here. In the gaps, the redactions, the questions detectives still won't answer. Who owned size 10 work boots in 1978 Clearwater? Why was Debra's pendant never found? And who, after all these years, is still afraid of a 15-year-old girl's DNA? This isn't a cold case. It's a shadow, and shadows can't exist without light. So here's the light. That DNA profile is a time bomb. Every day, it scans millions of names. Every day, it gets closer. The killer knows this. He feels it. Maybe he's changed his name, moved states, buried his past, but he can't bury his blood. Debra Rizzo's case isn't a mystery, it's a countdown. And somewhere, in someone's veins. The clock is ticking. Let's talk about secrets. Not the kind you keep from your parents or your boss. The kind that suffocate. The kind that twist your guts when you pass a cemetery or hear a siren at night. The kind that make you wonder, what if I'd said something? Someone knows. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's the person beside you right now. Maybe it's the old man bagging your groceries or the woman pumping gas at the next station. But someone, right now, is carrying a truth about Debra Rizzo that could end this. Let's break it open. Scenario 1. Your grandfather drinks too much at Thanksgiving. Always has. But one year, after the third whiskey, he starts rambling about Clearwater. Back in '78, awful thing happened. That girl. You laugh it off. Grandpa's telling ghost stories again. But later, you find a faded newspaper clipping in his toolbox. March 19th, 1978. Teen found dead. You don't ask questions. You tell yourself it's a coincidence. Scenario 2. Your aunt hasn't spoken to her high school best friend in 40 years. No one knows why, but at a family barbecue, someone mentions Debra's case. Your aunt freezes, drops her plate. I need air, she says. Later, you hear her crying in the bathroom. I should have told them. She whispers to no one. You pretend you didn't hear. Scenario 3. Your neighbor's husband worked construction in Florida in the late 70s. He came back different. Quiet. Jumpy. His wife started wearing long sleeves in summer. Once, when you borrowed a wrench, you saw a photo in his garage, a blue pickup truck. Restored it myself, he said, slamming the album shut. You didn't ask why his hands were shaking. Here's the truth about guilt. It doesn't age like wine. It rots. It festers. It follows you into nursing homes and chemo rooms and church pews. Think about the wife who lied for her husband. He was with me all day. She told cops in '78. But maybe she saw blood on his shirt. Maybe she found a silver pendant in his toolbox. Maybe she spent 46 years staring at the back of his head during breakfast, thinking I know what you did, or the friend who stayed quiet, the one who heard a boast at a bar. That Rizzo girl? She shouldn't have fought. Maybe he laughed it off. Maybe he told himself, Buddy's just talking trash. But now he's got grandkids, reads them bedtime stories, tucks them in, and every night, he sees Debra's face in theirs. Time does something strange to secrets. In 1978, loyalty was thick as blood. You didn't snitch, didn't rat, didn't air dirty laundry. But here's what they didn't know back then: DNA, ancestry databases, the internet. That blue pickup truck alibi? It's paper thin now. That friend who swore you were at the movies? He died last year. Took his lies with him. That wife who covered for you? She's tired. So tired. And the killer? He's not the same man. Maybe arthritis gnaws his hands, the same hands that tore Debra's shirt. Maybe he's got dementia, and his ramblings scare his daughter. Who's Debbie? She asks. He changes the subject. Or maybe he's dead. But if he is, someone else knows. A sibling, a child, a widow who still hears Debra's scream in her dreams. Let's talk about you. Yes, you, the one still watching. Maybe you moved to Clearwater last year. Found a strange box in your basement, old tools, a cracked Walkman, a silver chain with DLR engraved. Your landlord says previous tenant left junk. You toss it. Or maybe you're cleaning out your mom's attic. Find a letter from 1978. Don't come home yet. It says, postmarked March 18th. Or maybe you took a DNA test last week. For fun. To see if you're Irish or whatever. You don't know your results will ping a 46-year-old cold case. You don't know your grandfather's fishing trips to Florida weren't about fish. Here's the thing. Secrets aren't vaults. They're sieves. They leak. They slip. They crumble when you least expect it. Like the man who called the tip line in 1992. Check the quarry off Route 19. He said. Hung up. They searched. Found nothing. But in 2020, a hiker spotted something shiny in the mud, Debra's pendant. The chain was gone, the engraving worn smooth. Or the woman who mailed a confession to the Rizzos in 2008. Cursive handwriting. No signature. I drove him there. I didn't know. The postmark was smudged. The police said it was a hoax. But here's what haunts me. Debra's killer didn't act alone. He had a ride, an alibi, someone who washed his clothes, someone who noticed his knuckles were scraped raw that night, someone who still remembers the exact way he said, I took care of it, over scrambled eggs the next morning. That person, they're alive, and they're running out of time, not just because of DNA, Because guilt is a slow poison. It's why people confess on deathbeds. Why they whisper truths to priests or strangers or YouTube comment sections at 3 a.m. Maybe you're thinking, but what if I'm wrong? What if Grandpa was just a drunk? What if the pendant was a coincidence? What if the name that chills your spine is innocent? Here's the answer. Let the police decide. Your job isn't to solve it. Your job is to speak. One sentence, one name, one memory. That's all it takes. Debra's brother Tommy still mows his lawn every Tuesday. He's 57 now, has a daughter Debra's age. Every year. On March 18th, he drives to Drew Street, parks where her body was found, sits there until the streetlights flicker on. I used to hate the person who did this, he says. Now I just hate the people who let him get away. So ask yourself, what's heavier, loyalty? Or a 15-year-old girl's body in the dirt? What's louder, silence? Or Debra's mother screaming when they ID'd her corpse? What's sharper, the truth? Or the sandspurs she gripped as she died? Someone knows. And if that someone is you, it's time to choose, be the secret keeper, or the one who ends it. Listen to this silence. Really listen. This is the sound of a mailbox creaking open, of a brother holding his breath, of a father staring at the phone, willing it to ring. This is the sound of 46 years waiting for an answer that never comes. Debra's mother, Carol, died on a Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019. The nurses said her last words were, "Is there a letter?" Her husband Frank sat beside her, clutching her hand, knowing she wasn't talking to him. Frank's 82 now. His hands shake when he pours his coffee. His voice wavers when he says Debra's name. But every morning, he walks to the end of their driveway, stares down Drew Street. I'll outlive him, he tells Tommy. I'll outlive the bastard who did this. Tommy, he's 57, a father himself. But every day at 4 p.m., he checks the mail, even on Sundays, even in blizzards. He's looking for an envelope stamped Clearwater Cold Case Unit. Inside would be one word, solved. But here's what keeps him up at night. What if you're the missing piece? Not a detective, not a psychic. You, the person watching this right now. Because somewhere in your life, there's a breadcrumb, a offhand comment your uncle made at a barbecue, a name scribbled in your dad's old address book, a story your coworker told about their creepy neighbor who moved to Florida in the 70s. Maybe you think it's nothing. Maybe you're wrong. Let's break it down if you know a name, even a nickname. The guy your grandma called that strange boy from the auto shop. The man your mom warned you to avoid at the bus stop. The cousin who went off the rails after 78. Say it. If you've heard a rumor, he bragged about it once when he was drunk. She burned his clothes that night. They moved suddenly. No explanation. Tell it. If you've seen an object, a silver pendant with DLR engraved, a pair of size 10 work boots, caked in old mud, a Polaroid of a blue truck. Share it. You don't need proof. You don't need courage. You just need a phone. Call Clearwater PD at 727-562-4242. They won't ask your name. Message the Justice for Debra Facebook page. Administered by Tommy's daughter, Lena. She'll respond within minutes. Or comment below. Right now. 2 words. I know. We'll find you. But maybe you're thinking, it's too late. Carol's gone. Frank's fading. The killer could be dead. Here's why that doesn't matter. Debra's DNA is still on file. Still hunting. Still matching. If the killer is dead, his children's DNA will find him. If he's alive, his grandchildren's cheek swabs will corner him. Science doesn't care about obituaries. But here's what science can't do. It can't explain why he chose her. It can't tell Frank why his daughter died in socks she'd barely worn. It can't give Tommy back the big sister who protected him from bullies. Only you can do that. So let's talk about guilt. Not the killer's guilt, yours. The guilt of staying silent. Of ignoring that nagging voice that says, what if? The guilt of letting a 15-year-old girl become background noise in your life. Debra's case isn't a true crime story. It's a reckoning. Every time you scroll past this video, every time you mute it or close the tab, you're making a choice to side with the silence, to let a killer keep winning. But it's not too late. Frank still waits by the window. Tommy still checks the mail. And Debra? She's still on Drew Street. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a question, one only you can answer. So here's your choice. Close this video. Go back to your day. Let the algorithm bury this in cat videos and makeup tutorials. Or be the reason Frank gets to cry one last time. Be the reason Tommy stops checking the mail. be the reason Debra finally crosses the street. Her home's right there, 200 yards away. All she needs is someone to walk her there.